Very good evening, members.
Good evening.
I welcome you for this today's study circle, Forex transactions and derivatives. We have with us CA Praveen C.G. I request Bangalore Bank Chairman Sri Shravan Gurutur to escort the speaker and welcome him with the flower bouquet. Members, as you know, day after tomorrow we have a mega conference, the 15th Karnataka State Level CS Conference. The more than 900, nearly about 1,000 members have registered for the conference. We have left with very few seats. I request interested members to register at the earliest by tomorrow. On 21st, we are celebrating International Yoga Day, stress-free, healthy life through yoga for members and students. Kindly I request all the members to make use that unique program. And after that, we have an accounting in MS Excel with reference to ITR 4 on 22nd June. We have an addressing by CA Shivkumar H, is famously known as Excel Shivkumar. And again on 3 days residential refresher course at JSW campus Hampi. We are organizing jointly with Ballari branch 22nd, 23rd and 24th of June. I request all the members to make use this unique programs with registering well in advance. So coming to the today's study circle, CA Praveen C.G is going to address on Forex transaction and derivatives. CA Praveen is by qualification Chartered Accountant and Certified Public Accountant in the Bachelor of Commerce. Praveen C.G is based in Bangalore and has over 12 years professional experience in variety of clients in manufacturing, consumer goods, retail and IT industries. Praveen was on secondment as part of the national office on the Netherlands, where he was a part of the Global Accounting Consulting Services (ACS) team. Praveen is now part of the India ACS team, where he spends majority of his time on internal technical activities. Praveen regularly contributes to firm leadership publications on India's IFRS. Praveen is also actively involved in designing and delivering IFRS India's training workshops for clients. Praveen has over 12 years of experience in audits of Indian and multinational companies applying Indian GAAP, IFRS, India's. He is also involved in helping clients transition to India's in manufacturing and IT industries. With this introduction, I present before you CA Praveen C.G. Over to you, sir.
This session very tough because this is not something that we regularly come across in practice. And earlier in Indian GAAP, there was very less guidance also. There was a guidance that was there in AS11 to a limited extent. There were some announcements that the institute issued and people were following that. But other than that, there was very limited guidance. So I have a very brief agenda. Start with an introduction of what the regulations are. I'll briefly talk about what the accounting requirements in Accounting Standard 11 and the guidance note which has been issued by the institute are. We then open it up to questions. You can ask me questions even in between. If you please feel free to stop me and ask me questions in between if you have any clarifications. But I have a session for questions as well. And before I start, any views that I express are my own personal views and it doesn't necessarily represent the views of my firm. Right? Thanks. So in terms of introduction, what is a derivative? Can someone tell me what is a derivative? Why would anyone enter into a derivative? Let's just start with an introduction.
Underlying asset.
Underlying asset is a item that is already recognized. So you will enter into a derivative only to hedge risk on the underlying asset. So for example, if there is an item, let's say a foreign currency trade receivable, which is represented in foreign currency, and a company wants to hedge the risk of changes in foreign exchange rates, they would enter into a derivative to prevent loss on account of changes in foreign exchange rates. And these derivatives can be entered into for various purposes. One is, as I said, foreign exchange differences. It can be to hedge against interest rate fluctuations. So if you have a variable interest rate borrowing and you want to avoid variability in the cash flows on interest rates, you will enter into interest rate swap, and that's another derivative. You can also have commodity derivatives. So if a company is in commodity trade, let's say coffee or tea, and if they want to buy coffee seeds or coffee beans or tea, and they want to hedge against fluctuations in prices of coffee and tea, they will enter into derivatives or futures which are called coffee futures or tea futures. And these are entered into to prevent or avoid the company from having fluctuations in prices, procurement prices, when they buy these tea or coffee. Right? So essentially the purpose is to avoid variability and fluctuations and ensure that whatever management is committed as part of the budgeting process, that's met. And that's the whole purpose of entering into derivative transactions. Right? In terms of accounting guidance in India, there was very limited guidance. Accounting Standard 11, which was a very old standard, that talked about only two sorts of derivatives. One is forward exchange contracts, which essentially means a contract to exchange different units of foreign currency at a specified point in time. So if you enter into a forward contract with a bank, let's say the contract says at the end of 6 months, you will have to pay 65 rupees and you will get these many units of US dollars. And that's a very simple forward contract. And that's the only contract that Ind AS or AS 11, which was the old standard in Indian GAAP, spoke about. It gave accounting guidance for those transactions. There was also something called as a in-substance forward exchange contract, which means if you have a loan and if you have to hedge that loan, the loan will have two elements, interest and principal. But if the company enters into only a principal-only swap, let's say the loan is in USD and they want to swap the principal element of the loan from USD to INR, those forward exchange contracts, which would be called cross-currency principal-only swaps, those were covered in AS 11. Other than that, AS 11 did not cover anything else. All other nature of derivatives, people were allowed to account it in accordance with AS 30, which was a financial instrument standard which ICAI issued sometime in 2007. So this was supposed to be effective in 2011. There was a period where it was recommendatory, there was a mandatory period after 2011. So Institute issued three standards, AS 30, 31 and 32. So people who had derivatives which did not meet the requirements of AS 11 used to account it as per AS 30, especially when they had to do hedge accounting. There's another piece in AS 11. AS 11 is also applicable only when there are recognized assets and liabilities on the balance sheet. So for example, if a company has future sales in foreign currency and they want to hedge that risk of future sales in foreign currency, which is not recorded on the books. In such a scenario, AS 11 is not applicable, so people had to account it as per AS 30. Right? After AS 11, AS 30 was issued, Institute also issued an announcement. Now this announcement was applicable for any derivatives which were not applicable under AS 11 and for transactions like firm commitment. So if you have a purchase order, if you have a highly probable future sales or future purchases which you wanted to hedge, these future sales or future purchases are in foreign currency and company wanted to hedge those risks, foreign currency risks, those transactions of future sales, hedging of future sales of purchases in foreign currency were covered by this announcement. This announcement essentially said if you have such instruments, you will mark to market those instruments at every period end. If the instrument results in a gain, you will not recognize the gain. If the instrument MTM was a loss, you will recognize the loss. It went on the principle of prudence in AS 1. So essentially companies had three options. One was follow AS 11 if the requirements were met. If you wanted to follow hedge accounting, use AS 30. If you did not want to follow hedge accounting, you used to follow this announcement of the institute. Then there was an amendment to the global standard on financial instruments, which was going on. It took at least 6-7 years for this amendment to go on. In the interim, Institute withdrew this standards, AS 30, 31 and 32, which was supposed to be effective from April 11. Essentially because there was a global standard on financial instruments, the new Ind AS 109 which has come, that was supposed to be issued. So Institute withdrew these 3 standards. But people were encouraged to follow the principles of AS 30 wherever it was applicable, which means if there was no other standard which gave accounting treatment, people were still allowed to follow those principles in AS 30. Right? And finally, now there is a guidance note. So this guidance note on derivative contracts was issued in 2015, and this guidance note on derivative contracts is applicable from April 1, 2016. Now with this issue of this guidance note, the Institute announcement in March 2008 has been removed. The AS 30, 31, 32 principles which people were following is no longer relevant. So essentially, as we stand today, if a company is preparing its financial statements under IGAAP, they essentially have to follow 2 standards. One is AS 11, that is only applicable in case of very limited derivative contracts like forward exchange contracts, and there are recognized assets and liabilities on the balance sheet. Otherwise, the company would follow the guidance note which is issued by the Institute. Right? Any questions so far? Okay. So before I get into the accounting requirements and start explaining how this derivative accounting works, I just thought I will cover some of the definitions. So this guidance note defines derivative instrument to include 3 components. So the value of these derivative changes in response to a specified changes in interest rate, financial instrument prices or foreign exchange rate. So for example, if you have a interest rate swap which converts a fixed variable interest rate debt into a fixed interest rate debt, the value of the derivative changes because of changes in interest rate. Let's say the company has a 9% fixed rate debt borrowing, and they have a 9% variable rate borrowing, and they want to convert this into a fixed rate debt. Right? Then they're going to take an interest rate swap. Now when they take an interest rate swap to convert that variable interest rate borrowing into fixed rate borrowing, the value of the derivative would change if there is a change in the interest rate. Let's say the interest rate changes to 10%, but the company is supposed to pay only 9%. The 1% differential is the market value of that derivative. So the value of the derivative changes with changes in the market interest rates. Similarly, forward exchange contract, which is used to hedge a foreign exchange risk, the value of those instruments will change with the changes in the foreign exchange rates. These derivative instruments generally require very small investments. So upfront what you pay is a very, very nominal amount of premium. And the third condition is these are settled at a future date. One condition which is not included in the guidance note but which is prevalent in the international standards is derivative should also have the ability to be settled net. So for example, if you have a derivative instrument, let's say a interest rate swap, which we are talking about, you will not, which converts variable interest rate into a fixed interest rate debt, you will not pay fixed interest payments and receive variable interest payments. The instrument will also let the entity to settle the net difference between the fixed and variable rate, and that's the settlement that happens. Right? Essentially, derivatives have all these features. Okay. Forward exchange contract, again the simplest one that we have.
So in this, when you say the interest rate swap, the company is committed to pay only that fixed rate. So it doesn't get affected by the fluctuations.
Yeah.
So why is a net settlement come?
Yeah. So what happens is if you have a variable interest rate debt, the company is supposed to pay variable interest rate. Whenever the interest rate changes, the company will have to pay the revised interest rate. Yeah. To prevent that fluctuation in interest rate, company enters into an interest rate swap which will convert that into a fixed rate debt. Right. Now the question could be, why why don't you account both the loan and the derivative as one and account it as a fixed rate debt instrument? Right? But the standard says you cannot combine those two contracts and account it as one. You will have to account those two separately. You will have to account the loan separately and account the derivative separately.
Is it because that swap could be with somebody else?
It generally is with the bank.
Not with the supplier of the...
I mean, in case of loan, it generally is with the same bank. But in case of supply of goods and services, you may have a contract with the supplier, but your derivative will be with the market. So hedging instrument can be anything. Hedging instrument is generally a derivative, and the purpose of a hedging instrument is those for which fair value or cash flows are expected to offset the changes in fair value or cash flows of a hedged item. So for example, very simple one that we have taken so far is the interest rate swap. Any changes in the cash flows of the interest rate swap will affect the cash flows of the borrowing, cash flows that happen on the borrowing on account of interest payment, and that's a hedging instrument. Hedging instrument can also be non-derivatives. So in IFRS India's world, even any other asset which a company feels can effectively hedge any risk or relevant risk can be a hedging instrument. But for the purpose of this guidance note does not cover non-derivatives which can be used for hedging. The guidance note only covers derivative contracts. So for the limited purpose of this guidance note, let's say that hedging instrument is always a derivative, right? Which means it needs to meet all those three criteria on top. Hedged item can be anything. So a foreign currency receivable is a hedged item which a company will hedge for foreign exchange risk. Variable interest rate debt could be a hedged item which a company will hedge for interest rate fluctuations. Future sales in foreign currency could also be a hedged item which can be used for hedging foreign currency risk. Even future sales, there are two possibilities. One is where you have a firm order. There's a purchase order to deliver at a certain date, a certain quantity of goods. That's a firm commitment. It can also be a forecast sales. Management expects that certain volume of goods will be sold at a certain point of time in the future, and that's highly probable forecast sales. Even that could be a hedged item. So if you see all these hedged items, there is a risk, and always entities want to hedge these risks by using a hedging instrument. Right? For hedge effectiveness, so if a company wants to use hedge accounting, I will just bear with me, this is just a definition bit, we will cover what is hedge accounting.
How sales forecast can be is it, there is the other party involved, it is only an estimation.
Yeah.
What way you call it as a hedge?
So it's a hedged item, and that's a risk that the company will have to incur in the future. So if a company has a contract, let's say to sell in foreign currency today is June, next January they need to make some sale. That's a risk that the company already has.
That's a contract.
That's a contract.
But you are talking forecast.
Yeah. Similarly, highly probable forecast sales would also be a hedged item. If a company is expecting, let's say, 100,000 tons of steel to be sold in the next 1 year, they can potentially hedge that. It is similar to firm commitment, but the only condition there is the probability of occurrence of future sales should be highly probable. If it is not highly probable, then you cannot apply hedge accounting.
So, further on this particular topic, somewhere I read that there is a restriction by Reserve Bank that all this hedging can be done only against firm contracts.
Yeah.
So probable thing cannot be possible.
No. So the Reserve Bank requirement is slightly different from the accounting requirement. For a Reserve Bank perspective, even if you have what I said, future sales, which will be done, that is considered as a firm commitment. So, but what the Reserve Bank ensures is the amount of derivative contracts that you enter into at any point of time doesn't exceed the amount of future sales that are going to happen. So they don't want a situation where the amount of hedging instrument that you have the aggregate of hedging instruments that you have will exceed the future sales. Then you have a situation where the hedging instruments are in multiples of what the actual transactions are, and that could lead to speculation, which is what Reserve Bank will avoid, and that's a certification that Reserve Bank requires from statutory auditors. So if an entity wants to apply hedge accounting, they need to measure hedge effectiveness. So hedge effectiveness essentially means you need to compute the difference between the changes in fair value. So if you have a forward exchange contract, today if your contracted forward rate is say 65 for 6 months, and next month the rate changes to 63. So there is a movement of 2 rupees, right? You will compare the movement of 2 rupees with the foreign exchange difference that has happened on the asset or liability. For example, if this forward exchange contract was on a receivable, you would also compare the receivable. What is the foreign exchange rate or the exchange rate on the receivable? Let's say that is also 2 rupees. If that is the case, the hedge ratio in this case is 2 by 2. It's 100%. What we call it is a perfect hedge. The standard says you can apply hedge accounting only when the hedge ratio is within a normal range. Under IFRS and in today's, the old IFRS world, the standard was IAS 39 and it required the hedge ratio to be always between 80% to 125%. So for example, if the change in hedging instrument was 2 and the change in hedged item, change in the foreign exchange rate in my example, well let's say 6, 2 by 6 would give you a ratio of 33%, right? Then the standard would say you cannot apply hedge accounting because it's not highly effective. That standard said only if this hedge ratio is within a range of 80% to 125%, you can apply hedge accounting. Otherwise, you cannot apply hedge accounting. So that's essentially the normal range which people have to follow. The guidance note now, which is now aligned with the international practice, is there is no hard line. There is no 80 to 125% rule. Companies have to then phrase a policy in their risk management policy. They need to define what is an effective hedge. Let's say a company says 75% to 130% is still an effective hedge, and that's my policy. And if that criteria is met, people can still follow hedge accounting. Now the requirement of 80 to 125% is removed. The new guidance note, which is now currently applicable in Indian GAAP, also takes cognizance of this change. And even under this gap, there is no requirement for entities to have that tight range. They can define their own ratios. And once this ratio is defined, they need to stick to that consistently.
But when the range is fixed and the actual thing is outside this range,
Yeah.
Up to this point they can do the hedge accounting and balance they have to do some.
Yeah, when I come to that, what I did was I just cover the definition, so when I get to the concepts, we don't worry about the definitions. So I will cover those concepts. Okay. So we'll start with AS 11, which was the old standard, and this is very simple. It's very, very common in practice that they come across these contracts. So as I said, AS 11 is applicable for forward exchange contracts or in substance forward exchange contract. In substance, just to repeat, it just means those contracts which are there only to hedge a principal change, a foreign exchange risk on a principal. Another important point to remember in AS 11 is AS 11 is applicable only for forward exchange contract, interest rate swaps, those are outside. Commodity futures outside of AS 11, equity futures outside of AS 11. Only foreign exchange risk, derivative instruments that are hedged for foreign exchange risk are covered by AS 11. So if you have a cross-currency swap contract on principal amount of a derivative, principal amount of a borrowing, that is within the purview of AS 11. If it is an interest rate swap, that is outside the purview of AS 11. That is essentially because when an entity has a borrowing and an interest that should be payable on the borrowing, interest is not accrued in the balance sheet. Interest is accrued in the balance sheet on an ongoing basis. At the starting of the borrowing, there is no interest accrual. Since there is no asset or liability in the balance sheet, in respect of interest rate swap is outside AS 11. It's only the principal element which is in the balance sheet. So if any foreign exchange contract to hedge foreign exchange risk on a principal, that's within the purview of AS 11. So in terms of accounting, the standard says the forward premium. Forward premium essentially means, today if we stand, let's say there's a borrowing, the current spot rate is 60 and the company enters into a forward exchange contract and the contracted forward rate is 65. 60 minus 65 is the forward premium. Spot rate today and the forward contracted rate. Let's say 6 months down the line, the contracted rate is 65, that is forward premium. Such forward premium has to be recognized through amortization, straight line amortization. If the term of the contract is 6 months, you will do straight lining of that, 5 rupees times the nominal amount in the contract in the P&L. Right? Apart from doing that, entities will also have to restate that forward exchange contract. So at every period, like any trade receivable, any trade payable which is in foreign currency, this trade forward contract receivable or forward contract payable has to be restated. And that exchange difference will be accounted in the P&L. Right? I have an example, we'll walk through how those entries flow in. But in terms of principle, it's very simple. There is also those forward exchange contracts which are taken by an entity to hedge foreign exchange risk, but there are no assets and liabilities in the balance sheet. So essentially they could have taken it for trading purposes, speculation purposes. In case of those forward exchange contracts, the standard says you do an MTM valuation at year end, which is basically a mark-to-market valuation which will determine the fair value of that forward contract, which essentially means you need to compare the forward rate. So at every period, you will take a forward contract at the beginning of the contract. At every period, you need to see the forward contract rate for the remaining maturity. If I am doing a March statutory account, March year end, you need to see, and if the contract is terminating in September, which I took in Jan, I need to see the forward rate available in March till September and compare that with the contracted forward rate, which is in the forward contract itself. The difference between those two will be an MTM valuation. You do MTM valuation and account that in the P&L. There is no concept of accounting for premium separately. This is in instances where there is no asset or liability in the balance sheet. Right? Any questions? Okay. So I just put together an example of how this works, the accounting requirements in AS 11. So the example is a company has a loan of USD 1 million on Jan 1, 2018. Spot rate is 60, which means on the date when the loan was taken on 1st January, the exchange rate is 60 per US dollar and the loan is repayable within 9 months on 30th September. There are other relevant details on spot rate, forward rate. We will discuss about that as we go forward. Right? So the day one entry that an entity will pass is they receive a bank. Okay, I should also say that they entered into a forward exchange contract, and the terms of the forward exchange contract are that forward rate is fixed at 65. If you see the line there, forward rate for 9 months is 65, which means at the end of 9 months, the company is going to pay 65 and get that $1 billion to repay the loan, which is contractually fixed. So day one entry will be debit bank for 60 million and credit loan, right? And that's the spot rate. The next entry will be the company has to account for forward contract. Now the forward contract is the company will account for a foreign currency receivable, a deferred premium and foreign currency payable. So how does 65 come? At the end of 9 months, the company has to pay 65 rupees to get $1 million, and that's fixed. So you will multiply 65 by 1 million and account that as a forward contract payable. The 60 is the spot rate, and 5 is the difference between that 60 and 5, the forward premium that we spoke about. That's the 5 million. On 31st March, which is the year end, the company will recognize 3 months amortization of that 5 million. So essentially what I've done is 5 divided by 9 times 3 is 1.67. The loan is in foreign currency. Since it's a monetary item, that needs to be restated. So if you look at the, going back to the slide, the spot rate on 31st March is 63. We recognize the loan at 60. So we are recognizing a 3 million foreign exchange loss because the value of the loan, the obligation to pay the loan has increased. Right? The forward contract receivable, if you look at the first slide there, we recognize that at 60. We need to restate that because the exchange rate has moved from 60 to 63. So we will recognize an additional 3 million loss, 3 million gain on forward contract receivable. The foreign currency payable is frozen because my obligation to pay 65 rupees at the end of 9 months is fixed. So I am not going to restate that. 30th September, the company does the same thing. They recognize a premium which is 3.33 for the remaining 6 months. So the entire 5 million of premium is now recognized over a period of 9 months. They recognize an exchange loss on the loan. So going back to my exchange rate slide, the loan has moved, the exchange rate has moved from 63 to 68 from March to September. So the 5 rupee differential is recognized until September, the 5 million. The forward contract receivable is restated. So you end up recognizing another loss of, another gain of 5 million. The forward contract payable, as I said, the company on Jan 1 locked their obligation to pay 65 million. They are settling that obligation to pay 65 million on 30th September, which is frozen. And finally, you receive that 68 million from the bank, which is used to settle the loan. If you essentially look at what has happened here, the company has just paid 65 million and the differential 5 million is recognized over the period of the contract. The exchange gain or loss on the forward contract receivable and the loan are offsetting. So there is no impact that's coming on the P&L. So if you see my example, maybe it's in 2 different slides. The foreign exchange loss on the loan is 5 million until September, which is offset by a foreign exchange gain of 5 million on the forward contract. So that's the, although they're not following hedge accounting, there is a natural hedge here. The loss on the loan is offset by gain on a forward contract receipt. Any questions?
Actually, there is a notional gain of 3 million. 3 million. Actually, hedging has done at the rate of 65, but as on 30th September it was 68. Actually, there is a gain of 3, notional gain.
Yeah, correct. So, since I had locked that contract at 65, the bank is obligated to pay 65. There is a notional 3 rupee, but we won't account it because there is no accounting impact of that. Because my obligation was always to pay 65.
Means 3 million the company has saved by going into.
Yeah, correct. And the exchange gain or loss that happened on the loan was neutral. That was nullified by doing this forward.
5 million.
Correct. Yeah. So if you have a budget at the beginning of January and the budget said I will pay only 65 million and on that day you got a bank to give you a forward contract for 65 million, you met your budgets. And the whole purpose why entities enter into forward contracts is to meet their budgets.
So we drop the ledger accounts, where will that $5 million go?
So 5 million is the P&L. If you see here, the forward premium.
It's got the premium.
Premium is in the P&L.
So there could even be a loss if it could have been, say, 62 instead of 68.
Yeah, correct.
It will continue to be flat.
Yeah.
So the premium is a debit to the P&L, right?
Premium is a debit to the P&L.
So it means the fact that there is no loss or gain, I am not able to understand. Because 60 rupees is the loan, you end up paying 65. So that 5 has got debited to the P&L as a premium.
Correct. So basically the company was willing, their appetite was to pay 65. And anything more than 65 they were not willing to take. So they locked it in January. 3 million will not come at all. The 68 is what you saved by entering into this forward contract. The 3, that 68 minus 65 is what you saved by locking your obligation at 65.
So you are crediting foreign exchange gain by 5 here, and the previous slide you were getting credited by 3.
Yeah, so that is offset by the foreign exchange loss of 3 on the loan. The loan was also restated and the forward contract is also restated. So those two are offsetting. 3 here is offsetting the gain of 3 in this slide. Maybe it should have come in the same slide. You see here the 5 foreign exchange loss at the end is offset by a foreign exchange gain of 5 on the forward contract received.
As on 30th September, suppose the actual rate is not 65, spot rate is not 65, but it is 66. We will still recognize only 3.33 or?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's fine. So restating as on the balance sheet will be based on your contract, not based on the spot rate on the day.
So what would have happened in that instance is 67. If you see the last entry there, foreign exchange loss of 5 that I have, that would have become 4.
If you had not hedged.
No, even if you had hedged and the spot rate is 67, in that scenario, I would have recognized 4 as the loss here, which would have got offset with a 4 of gain on forward contract receipt.
I am talking about how will you restate the loan balance. Loan balance will be stated at 65 because you have hedged at 60, right?
No.
Or at 67 because it is spot rate.
So loan and the hedge are different. You will normally restate loan at the spot rate. You will not consider the forward rate for the loan. Can I move on? Okay. So that was the accounting that was required only for forward exchange contracts, foreign exchange contracts under AS11. And in AS11, as I said, and to repeat it again, it is only for those instances where there was an asset and liability on the balance sheet, and that was very, very simple. And now there is a guidance note which covers any other contract for which AS11 is not applicable. It covers all scenarios where there are no assets and liabilities in the balance sheet. It covers future sales, future purchases, it covers equity index futures, anything that you can think of which is in the nature of a derivative is covered through this guidance note. So what we will do now, we will see the accounting requirements and also how hedge accounting is applied as per this guidance note. Right? So this guidance note is applicable for all Indian GAAP reporters from 1st April 2016. So again, if you look at that applicability, it covers all forward exchange contracts of highly probable forecast transactions and firm commitment. So if there are purchase orders, if there is a budget and the company is expecting that there is a high probability of meeting sales in a particular period, those sort of hedges are covered in this guidance note. Currency, cross-currency interest rate swaps, futures, options, equity index futures, stock futures, commodity derivative contracts, those are all covered by this guidance note. So this guidance note also gives accounting requirements for inventories, FA, which is property, plant and equipment, and investments which are hedged. So let's say a company has a investment which is in equity shares, and that investment in equity shares will be accounted as per AS 13, it will be accounted at cost. But if you apply this guidance note, the company will have to account that and restate that investment at fair value. Essentially what they do is they account it at cost, and the fair value differential they account it as separate line item, so cumulatively, which means that it's accounted at fair value. So it also gives guidance on accounting for these hedged items which are part of a hedging requirement or a derivative requirement.
So investments, why do they hedge? It's going to be long term.
Yeah.
How long they will keep on hedging?
So investment can be hedged only when they want, the company is not in the intention of selling it in the, company has the intention of selling it in the short term. It's a short term investment, they want to hedge that. If it's a long-term investment, you cannot, because the changes in fair value is not a risk. Because you are saying that I'm neutral to any changes in fair value that happens during the course of that period. I would want to hold it to the long term. It's an investment in subsidiary, you cannot hedge. Any other equity instrument which I am holding it to, make profits, I want to hedge. So the guidance note does not cover forward exchange contract which are covered by AS 11. It also doesn't cover cross-currency principal only swap which are covered by AS 11. Surprisingly, in the India's IFRS world, the embedded derivative standard or the financial instrument standard covers embedded derivatives. So essentially what it means is you need to look at anything which is not in the nature of a derivative. So for example, if you have a borrowing, you need to see the terms of the borrowing, see if there are any, let's say specifically debentures, you need to look at if there is a equity conversion feature. If there is an equity conversion feature in a borrowing, then you need to split that equity conversion feature and account that as a derivative and account it as an embedded derivative separately. Now the problem with this guidance note is saying it doesn't cover any embedded derivatives. So essentially it means you don't have to separate embedded derivatives when you're following Indian GAAP. And that the primary reason why they've done that is because the other standards in India are not compliant with this requirement. So to ensure that this guidance note is in compliance with the existing Indian GAAP standards, they did not include the requirement for embedded derivatives. Okay. So the primary principle of this guidance note is if a company enters into derivative contracts and they do not want to follow hedge accounting, they will account all such derivative contracts at fair value. Which means if you have a forward exchange rate or an interest rate swap, instruments like that, you will go to the bank, ask the bank what is the MTM or the fair value. I mean, commonly they term it as in the money and out of the money. The bank will give you a value and you account that value in the balance sheet. Basically, you will account that value in the balance sheet by debiting or crediting the P&L. So it could be a derivative asset or liability, and the corresponding effect will go to the P&L. At the end of the term of the instrument, you will settle that by paying that net amount to the bank. So that is if you do not want to follow hedge accounting. The standard also doesn't permit synthetic accounting. So there was a question earlier, if I have a loan which is a variable interest rate loan and there is a forward exchange interest rate swap which converts that variable interest rate into a fixed interest rate loan, why don't I account it as fixed interest rate loan? This guidance note specifically says you cannot do synthetic accounting. Synthetic accounting means you cannot consider the loan and the derivative as one instrument and account it as one. You should account the loan separately and you should account the derivative separately, and that's specifically mentioned in the guidance note. So what is the purpose why companies want to enter into hedge accounting? So we will see how the hedge accounting works, but the primary purpose that hedge accounting is applied by companies is to avoid mismatches. So for example, if a company is entered into a future sales contract, right? So if it's a future sales contract, the sales are going to come, future sales that are going to come in foreign currency in 12 months time. So those sales will be accounted by the company only at the end of the year. But if you have a forward exchange contract, those forward exchange contracts have to be accounted today. So the MTM value of this forward exchange contract will be accounted in the P&L from day one, while the sales will come in the P&L at the end of 12 months. What hedge accounting does is, it removes this mismatch. It ensures that those movements in forward exchange contracts are recognized in equity. You will park it in an account called cash flow hedge reserve, and that cash flow hedge reserve is classified in equity. You will put it under reserves. So if you look at companies which are following Indian GAAP and have a reserves and surplus note, if they have a line item for cash flow hedge reserve, that means they are following hedge accounting. And when the sales is recognized, the standard says you will flush it out of equity and recognize that gain or loss in the P&L. So that's the whole purpose why companies want to do hedge accounting, to ensure that losses or gains on those hedge instrument and the hedged item are accounted in the same period. So why is it very difficult to apply hedge accounting? It's because there are onerous documentation requirements. So the standard says hedge accounting is a privilege. So you cannot account that hedge accounting by choice. You need to comply with a lot of conditions before you can apply hedge accounting. So the standard says the company needs to have a risk management policy. And that risk management policy has to define what the risks are. So if you have extensive amount of overseas sales, the company should say my risk exposure is coming from foreign exchange fluctuations which can happen in dollar or euro sales. So that's the risk management, that's the risk. Now they should have a policy to manage that risk. The policy could say, I will cover 60% of those foreign currency sales to derivative instruments. Right? Similarly, in case of highly probable sales, in case of future sales, those transactions should be highly probable. If it is not probable or if it is found to be not probable, hedge accounting will result in ensuring that entire amount of gain or loss on those hedge instruments are immediately recognized in the P&L. The benefit of applying hedge accounting is lost. Right? Similarly, if you have a derivative instrument which has a term of 12 months, you cannot hedge it for the partial term of the instrument. If the derivative instrument is for 12 months, you need to designate it and hedge it for a period of 12 months. We spoke about effectiveness, right? The changes in fair value or cash flows on the hedged item and the hedge instrument. The company in their initial documentation will have to say how will they measure effectiveness. They will have to determine what is the ratio. So the company, in my example again, they will say 60% of my foreign currency sales will be hedged, and then they will have to say I meet the hedge accounting requirement criteria as long as the hedge effectiveness ratio is within a range of, let's say, 75 to 120%. So that should be defined in the policy document.
Sir, this partial term, in business situations, you may expect funds inflow of US dollars, let's say, after 105 days. So for 105 days, I don't get a future. I think multiples of months or something like that.
Yeah.
Is that what do you do there?
So essentially how it works is your hedge will be in play unless and until, in your example of, let's say, future sales, I have a 105 days credit period. So let's say the sale will happen in, I'm standing in January, the sale will happen in April. After that I have a 105 days credit period, right? And I take a contract until, let's say, 105 days, which is what, maybe 6 months, right? June, right? The contract ends in June. The hedge accounting will be applied only until April, when the sale is booked. After that, the benefit of hedge accounting is lost. When the sale hits the P&L, you will recognize everything in the P&L. We will cover that in the example. I have an example on that. But once that sale is recognized in the P&L, the benefit of hedge accounting is lost. Then it becomes alright. So the only thing that is crucial is you should not have an instrument that expires before the sale is recognized. Then the hedge accounting requirements will not allow you to do hedge accounting.
But still, I require that say 65 rupees for 70 rupees per dollar when I actually get the US dollars. So I will get the money in end of June. But the earliest available thing available is maybe July for me.
Yeah.
So how do I?
Yeah. So you may get the cash in June, and the earliest available end of the maturity period is July. But let's say that June cash flow that you will get in June, for which you've already recognized the sale in April. Now once that sale is recognized in April, what you recognized in the cash flow, hedge reserve, equity that I spoke about, that is flushed to P&L.
Okay.
After After that, you will just keep mapping the fair value movements in the P&L. It doesn't matter. But the problem will come if your instrument expires before April when you recognize the sale. If your instrument expires before you recognize the sale, then the hedge is not effective at all.
So the hedge period can go beyond the actual realization,
Correct.
but not before.
Yeah. So what the entities have to do in the same example, if it's January, they will have to designate that instrument against sales that happen in April. And if that instrument is expiring in July, we are good. The hedge accounting requirements will be met. But the instrument is expiring in March, then you cannot designate it against April sales. So the guidance note also prevents entity from voluntarily de-designation of hedging. So the same example, future sales, I've hedged it for sales that will happen in, designated against sales that will happen in April. Now during the term from January to April, company cannot voluntarily de-designate this instrument. Once you designate that instrument against sales that will happen in April, you are committed to do hedge accounting and account for those foreign exchange differences in the cash flow hedge reserve. So companies are prevented from voluntarily de-designating hedging instruments. So in terms of how do you measure effectiveness, the standard is very silent. It actually gives you 3 options, and each of the 3 options can be followed. Critical terms match is the simplest of the one. So if your forward contract is a very simple forward contract, and if your instrument is also, let's say, a bank borrowing, which is bank borrowing in foreign currency, which is payable at the end of certain term, and the only fluctuation that you are trying to hedge is foreign currency risk, and it's a really simple forward exchange contract, the ones that we've already discussed. In that scenario, if the forward contract and the bank borrowing are taken on the same day, the term of the forward contract and the bank borrowing is the same, you do not have to do an extensive mathematical computation to prove hedge effectiveness. The standard allows you to do a critical terms match. So you will compare my term of borrowing. My term of borrowing is 6 months. The forward contract is for 6 months. My borrowing is for 1 million USD. The forward exchange contract is also for 1 million notional amount. If these 2 terms match, the possibility of hedge becoming ineffective is virtually nil. Right? If that is met, the company can just do a critical terms match and live with it. There could be certain really complex instruments also. For example, if you hedge both your foreign currency risk and also interest rate fluctuations, it's called a cross currency interest rate swap. In those situations, the critical terms match may not be effective. It becomes very difficult. So then the standard says there's 2 possibilities. One is called a dollar offset method. The second one is called a regression analysis. So essentially, what these models do is it lets companies to estimate what will be the future fluctuations in your borrowing and the future fluctuations in your forward contract. The future fluctuations are determined based on yield curves. So if you go to a bank, the bank will give you a yield curve. So the various security agencies also publish these yield curves. So for my example of a 6-month borrowing and a 6-month forward contract rate, the entity will go to a bank, they'll get a yield curve, they'll estimate this will be the forward exchange rate after 2 months, this will be the forward exchange rate after 3 months, and this will be the forward exchange rate after 6 months. So they need to plot these in an Excel sheet for the forward exchange contract. Similarly, they need to plot that forward exchange contract for the borrowing, and then they need to compute the variance between these 2. And when they do this comparison of variances, they need to determine a ratio to ensure that the range is within what they said. If it is within that range which the company determined, they can do hedge accounting. So remember, we have still not started hedge accounting. Even before you start, there is a whole host of requirement. Right?
Sir, is Is this effectiveness done by the other party also?
A bank may not do.
Bank may not.
I mean, so hedge accounting, it is not necessary that bank does a mirror accounting. I want the benefit of hedge accounting in my books, so I am doing it. The bank may not do. And sometimes I may have a contract with a vendor to sell, and I have a forward contract with the bank. So there is no way the other party will do. So this documentation, the bullets on top, the minimum requirements, the effectiveness test, these needs to be done at the initiation. When a company enters into a forward contract and a transaction, it needs to be done when you start or initiate hedge accounting. The chances are, if you enter into a forward contract, let's say borrowing you enter into January, then you enter into a forward contract in April to hedge that borrowing. The chances are you will not meet the effectiveness test. For your hedge to be effective, you should enter into a forward contract as close to your borrowing as possible. Because of changes in foreign exchange rate, interest rates, the effectiveness would be different. It will not be met. Right? So, even before you start hedge accounting, companies will have to determine hedge effectiveness. They need to prepare all this documentation. So, what is my risk management objective? They need to determine the ratios, and they need to document all this in a piece of paper. And after doing this, they need to keep testing this for hedge effectiveness as they go forward. And the requirement is, it needs to be done at each reporting period. So if a company is a listed company and they need to do quarterly reporting, they need to keep testing this effectiveness test at every quarter. Any questions? Okay. Which is why I said requirements to apply hedge accounting in practice are onerous. So many companies, if they find it very difficult to meet the hedge accounting criteria, they will buy derivatives, but they will not apply hedge accounting. They will account, if you do not apply hedge accounting, you will account for those derivatives at fair value in the P&L. You will account for those transactions when it happens. They'll hope that there is a natural hedge. If that is an option that the company wants to take, they don't have to meet with all these documentation requirements. So essentially the guidance note gives you three forms of hedging. The fairly simplest one is the cash flow hedge. The second one is the fair value hedges, and the next one is the net investment hedge. Right? So cash flow hedge, as the name suggests, what the entity is trying to hedge is variability in future cash flows. I mean, this is very, very common in practice. If you have a variable interest rate loan, what is the risk that the company has? The risk that the company has is my cash outflows for interest will vary, and I want to hedge that. If you have foreign currency sales, foreign currency purchases, the risk that the company has is my cash outflows will, or the cash inflows will change. Right? And this cash flow hedge can be used for recognized asset or liability, which is generally the case with the trade receivables or generally the case with your borrowings. Highly probable forecast transactions, future sales, purchase order sales. When you apply hedge accounting, as I said, the purpose of accounting hedge accounting is to ensure that there is a matching. So when you are applying hedge accounting, you would account for changes in the fair values of the hedging instruments in equity. That's the second bullet there. Right? You will account that in equity unless and until the transaction hits the P&L. And when the transaction hits the P&L, the amount that's recognized in equity is reclassified to P&L. So on recycling, there are rules. So the first one is if the transaction results in a financial asset or a liability. And when does this arise? So this arises when you hedge a bank borrowing. When you hedge a bank borrowing for interest rate risk, you have a variable interest rate loan, you need to hedge it for variability in the interest rate. at each period end, the company will recognize a interest liability. And that interest liability results in a financial liability, because that's a liability that the bank has to pay, company has to pay to the bank, right? When the interest accrued is recognized, interest liability is recognized, the amount that you recognize in the fair value changes that you recognize in equity, that is recycled to P&L. In case of non-financial asset, when I mean non-financial asset, these are items like inventory, property, plant and equipment. So in case of a hedge of a non-financial item, so for example, if a company is hedged purchases of inventory, right? When those items are hedged, and that results in a recognition of a non-financial item. So I am purchasing inventory, I wanted to hedge cash flow variances on inventory. I take a forward commodity futures contract, and that's a cash flow hedge. Now when I buy inventory, that inventory is recognized in the balance sheet. So in case of such non-financial item, there are two choices. One is, you can recognize that, you can recycle the gain and losses when the item hits the P&L. So if it's a property, plant and equipment, when the depreciation charge is recognized, you will reclassify it to P&L. In case of inventory item, when the sale is recognized, you will reclassify it to P&L. The other option is, you can add it to the value of the item. So if I recognize inventory, along with inventory, I will also recognize this fair value changes on the derivative instrument. And when I sell that inventory, the inventory cost together with the fair value changes is recognized in the P&L. And this is a policy choice. So entities need to determine as their accounting policy what is the choice that they want to exercise. And once they write this in their accounting policy, they need to apply this consistently. Any questions on this? Okay, so let's look at an example of how this works in practice. I've chosen a really simple example straight from the guidance note. So let's say a company has an order in July 2013 to supply goods to a US company in Jan 2014. Credit period is 90 days and the order value is 100,000 USD. On that same day, company also enters into a forward exchange contract to sell USD 100,000. It's a sell contract because when they sell the goods and receive the consideration, they need to sell that currency to the bank for 65 USD, and spot rate on the day is 64.5. Right? Again, we'll look at these other exchange rates when we get to the entries. On day one, so remember the sales will happen only in January 2014. We are in July 2013. In July 2013, there will be no entry in the books. Till January 2014, what will the entity account? They will account for this forward exchange contract movements. So the derivative movements in equity, which is a cash flow hedge reserve account. So how is that 3,80,000 coming? My contracted forward rate is 65. And if you look at this forward rate till April, which is available as at Jan 2014, it's 61.2. So if I stand in January and ask for a forward rate for 3 months, to explain that, the company says at constant exchange rate, this is the revenue. But that is not related to accounting. In accounting, we don't account transactions at constant exchange rates.
Okay, it's about past information, this is for,
correct,
for future.
Yeah. Also, if you look at AS11, there is a paragraph 46A which gives option for company to recognize these foreign exchange gains and losses on borrowings as part of fixed assets, or you can capitalize it as part of a separate asset. If you have a foreign currency borrowing in that situation and that is hedged, what the standard permits is you can recognize both the foreign exchange differences on the loan and also this forward contract as part of fixed assets.
Sir,
Yes.
Sir, derivatives as a product which demand from the Indian corporates. I'm just trying to check for the various categories of companies. Suppose a company is an exporter, so it can keep its inward remittances in a EFC account. So from that EFC account, you can make payments on current account, capital account. So you can make overseas investments, you can make salary, travel, or any other expense also. So for such a company, I think this derivatives as a product may not be much in demand. Am I right, sir?
I mean, if you want to, if it's an export-oriented company,
You're a software company who does exports from your global delivery center in India. So you raise your invoices, and with rupee sliding, I don't think you will be keen in fixing the rate at which you want to receive the receivables.
it actually depends. So if they expect the rupee to slide further and that's their expectation, they may not hedge it. But if they expect the rupee to strengthen, then they might want to fix it at that rate. Right? So today, let's say the rupee is 68, and it's expected today that we go to 72, I will not hedge.
Yes.
But if it is expected that it strengthen and come back to 65, I would want to lock it at 68.
So that the bank will pay irrespective of the spot rate at 68 cents.
Yeah, the bank will look at what are the rates available, and bank will give you a forward contract based on the yield curve. So banks are modeling based on yield curves, and they will give you a rate that is available on that date.
On the date you are hedging.
On the date when I go and ask the bank to give me a forward contract. Hedging is my prerogative.
Yes, yes. Okay. Second, suppose you are a services company, and you provide service delivery from your overseas branches. So it means you send your resources on site, take the purchase order also in the name of the on-site branch, provide service delivery, collect the money. So you can still keep the foreign currency in the overseas branch bank itself. It need not be repatriated because RBI doesn't have any control over that.
Yeah.
So using that money also, you can make investments overseas, or you can pay for imports or anything else. So for such company also, this derivative as a product may not be much in demand. This is my view. Maybe you can correct me if I am wrong.
Essentially, what companies have to do is they have to see what fluctuations will hit my P&L. If there are fluctuations hitting your P&L, you can hedge those. So in your example, you had a company in USA which gives you offshore thing, you posted your staff there, and you bill it in USD. But the company still prepares financial statements in INR. This is an Indian company, it's an offshore satellite office. I posted my staff. I pay salaries in INR. My financial statements in INR. I incur all expenses in INR.
No. For the people who are posted overseas, you can appropriate the collections received, the amounts received from in US and make the payment there only. No, you need not transfer from India to there. You can use the money collected over there, keep it there in a bank branch, spend out of that for your expenses and your salaries and other things. So in that case, there is no Indian rupee exposure for the expenses for your people posted abroad.
You're correct, but for the revenue that you book, I am billing in USD, but I am recording it in INR.
That is actually that is an accounting thing. There is no actually extra cash outflow from India.
Yeah.
So third option could be like you are a multi-mega project company in India, like your Tata Power's Mudra project, where the debt exposure also is in foreign currency, and multilateral financial institutions like IFC, ADB, EBRD are involved. Are you permitted to keep the loans in foreign currency, or because you are making imports for your plant in India? I'm not sure on the
you are permitted to have foreign currency loans.
So that can be kept in foreign currency itself in India. Is that possible? So if that is possible, the only hedge that is required is only with reference to the repayment of the loans. But with reference to imports of machinery and other service, project management charges, etc., you can still use this foreign currency loan kept in foreign currency only. There is no need to hedge because loan is in dollars, payment is also in dollars. There is no hedge required, right?
The only problem that comes in is these are accounted in INR financial statements.
Outflow point of view, there is no cash outflow.
But
accounting point of view,
yes. If you want to protect your P&L, you need to do the hedging. You get materials, although you pay using this USD loan, but when I record this, there could be fluctuations, and that fluctuations can arise because of fluctuations in USD. Because of which I want to protect my P&L.
Like the last one, like this SR Rosneft deal. You take investments from Russia and make payment for the Iranian loan. Money doesn't come into the territorial waters of India, even though we say some 15 billion or more than that has come to India as FDI. It actually has not come because Russian consortium is going to make transfer outside of the country only to the company's foreign debt. So those transactions also you don't need to hedge, right?
Yeah, I mean those are
why I am asking is in the Indian context, derivative as a product, how what is the demand for that product? Like is it an academic discussion or is it a frequently used product and therefore?
So I mean, if you look at large listed companies today, it's very common to have this cash flow hedge accounting. You may not have fair value hedge accounting, you may not have net investment hedge accounting, but cash flow hedge accounting is extremely common. It will be very difficult for you to find a company which doesn't have this.
Suppose where your exposure is on the receivable side, I mean if your payment side is squeezed in favor of payment side as exports or repayment, and on the receipt side in terms of collections and receivables is less, then probably you will go in for hedge accounting. Suppose your collections or receivables are more than what you intend to make payment, then the appetite to hedge will be much less. Is that right?
Yeah, so that's a good one. So what we generally see is companies do hedge accounting when there are mismatches. So I manufacture goods in INR, spending rupees, but I sell in USD. So in my P&L there is a mismatch. But there could be a company which is importing goods from United States. So there is a trade payable which is in US dollars, and they also sell in United States dollars. So there is a natural hedge in your P&L. In those cases, you don't need hedge accounting. You are recording trade payable and trade receivable. You are achieving a natural hedge. So then you don't have to do all those accounting gimmicks. Any more questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Big applause to the speaker, Praveen C.G. On behalf of Managing Committee, on behalf of members present here, I would like to thank CA Praveen C.G. for handling the session on Forex transactions and derivatives. I request Bangalore Bank's immediate past chairperson, CA Geeta AB to come forward and present a moment. I thank all the members for the active participation. Thank you. Good night.